I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zeiss Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome everyone to our very first class chat Alchemist, going in alphabetical order. That is how we do. So this is going to be a series where we basically talk a little bit about like the story themes and abilities of the various classes. It's in a way maybe a little more introductory than like a GM tools for adding tragedy into your game or some kind of like really advanced-ish topic. But that doesn't mean that we're just going to like literally read all the proficiencies.
Initial proficiencies.
Wait, Alchemist, there's no sight more beautiful to you than a strange brew bubbling in a beaker, and you consume your ingenious elixirs with abandon. Now, we're not just going to read the class. You can read the class if you want. We're going to just kind of talk about the themes, briefly do sort of an overview of what it is, what the situation is with the class, what kind of things you would probably be expecting to do with the class, what you're good at, and what the possibilities are. And of course, by virtue of doing it alphabetically, we picked what the class that is one of the most complicated to do that in, because the Alchemist is a class with like a really subtle and nuanced like high polynomial power growth over levels that is pretty interesting, but you sometimes miss exactly what's going on there until you get to having a high level alchemist like we did in our War for the Crown game, and you're like, what? How much is he adding to all of everything? And then I remember the wizard was like, how are you not running out of your things? And alchemist is like, I'm not even close. So it's very, very interesting, and it all starts with the alchemist class. So I think let's start by talking about the themes and the stories of the alchemist. So the alchemist class is sort of based on the idea of alchemy from the real world somewhat. That idea that you can transmute lead into... Is it lead into silver and iron into gold? I think it's lead into silver and iron into gold. Whatever that is. And all of the other principles of medieval alchemy that even Isaac Newton thought that was a thing, alchemy, that he needed to figure out. But it also kind of has a little bit of mad science to it.
Yeah, the idea of tinkering and experimenting and just throwing some things together to see how they work.
It almost feels like it's sort of a mix of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and a mad science and actual medieval alchemy ideas and like maybe like some of the chemical stuff that's like in The Witcher and stuff, all that other stuff.
And there's also there's also like the experimental healer, the medieval doctor goes into that
the
as well.
Plague Doctor. All of that sort of mixed into the original Alchemist class in Pathfinder 1st edition. And that turned out to be the most popular class outside of the core in Pathfinder 1st edition. So it's in the core in Pathfinder's 2nd edition. So with its new iconic Fumbus, the iconic goblin alchemist, who I have here, but it's also just on the back of the core rulebook. So Fumbus definitely looks pretty fearsome, but he's actually like a pretty smart and restrained guy when he's not burning everything down, who wants to join the Pathfinder Society. So alchemists really have an idea about versatility. They have a whole bunch of alchemical items that they can use for a variety of purposes, and they're brilliant enough to be able to make them on the fly. Though the mechanic is that you get them at a reduced rate if you do that. We'll get into that a little bit later. And so there are a lot about versatility, utility, always having what you need for the current situation, and they're potentially in high quantities because they're very focused on crafting.
Yes, that was what I was gonna.
Ninja'd. Okay,
yes.
So that's sort of the story of the alchemist, but your individual alchemist might vary very wildly on that. You might be a firebomber who's constantly blowing things up. You might be sort of very focused on mutagens or drinking things that like transform you into a Mr. Hyde like form, and then attacking with that. Or like Linda said, more of a plague doctor type character, your poisoner.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different kinds of
and
alchemists.
when Mark was talking about the versatility too, Alchemist has a lot of flexibility to because they have so many, particularly as they get into higher levels, they have a lot of flexibility to say, okay, you know, today I'm going to do something that's very different from what I did on another day as a part of my basic plan, and then I'm also going to adapt on the fly to whatever's happening.
That's right. And the one thing that that I will talk about here, that's just in the class write-up, is the idea that the class suggests that in a combat you might throw bombs or warp your body with mutagens, support the party with elixirs. Social encounters, you may talk about alchemical items and secrets when you're exploring. You keep your eye out for trouble. Downtime, alchemy, brewing, science for science, and that's sort of what the class sets down as the expectations for your character. You might enjoy tinkering with strange formulas and reagents, single-minded dedication and recklessness, get a kick out of wreaking havoc with alchemical concoctions, endlessly experiment to discover new, more potent alchemical tools, and others probably think you're some kind of eccentric wizard or sorcerer or something and don't understand that you don't cast spells.
It's not magic, it's alchemy.
They may not understand your zeal for alchemy, creativity, and invention, and they may assume that if you haven't caused a catastrophe with your experimentations, that you inevitably will.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the subs. Thanks for the subs, Reckless and Joe.
Yeah, thanks so much, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So, that's kind of the Alchemist concept in a nutshell. Let's look at it mechanically. So, the Alchemist starts out with a strong fortitude and reflex save. Their will and perception, maybe not as much. They're a little more absent-minded.
Thanks for the cheers, Numbat, and a hype train has
begun.
We've
got a hype train. It's our first hype train of 2021. And actually, first one in a while. So thanks, everybody. And I wonder if there are new emojis at this point on the hype train. Probably.
Thanks for the cheer, Rico.
So let's continue our hype train as we continue talking about the Alchemist. So the Alchemist being a little bit more absent-minded, but honestly, there's so many explosions going on.
Whoa, thanks, Numbat.
Wow.
Flood of subs.
Wow.
Everybody
That's
subs.
so many subs. Sub-only chat. And there's all these 2021 emojis that people are getting. So,
Whoa, thanks, Reckless. Reckless just gifted 5 tier 1 subs.
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much. Was that wow, and that was part of the one that was immediately after Numbat?
Yes,
or
yes,
is there another
it's the one immediately after Numbat, yeah.
Whoa, so
one
many
right after
emotes,
another.
so
Level
many
4
emotes.
complete already. Thank you so much, everybody.
Wow. And Numbat
just cheered again. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Numbat's getting really close to the highest tier reward. Just on her own.
Oh, thank you, Joe. Another 100 for Joe.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, back to the Alchemist and the hype train at the same time. I'm very excited. Thank you so much for sharing for the hype train and also just the Arcane Mark community has been very important to us during 2020, and we're very fortunate to have so many great people in the community. And if you are not in the Arcane Mark community, other than you're watching this video, you can go to tiny.cc/arcanemark. I've put the link in the chat and join the community for chatting. So, in addition to what I was saying about the Alchemist before, after the most recent errata, they have light and medium armor because strength-based kind of hulking alchemists kind of want to have medium armor available because that's sort of the armor of choice for strength-based characters other than the ones who actually have heavy and slow themselves down.
Yeah, but the Alchemist, I mean, when you picture the Alchemist covered with like these these bandoliers of gear and all sorts of other things. They need to be able to be at least a little bit lighter on their feet than if they're clanking around in a full plate.
And the Alchemist has just a one. They have an additional skill over the Wizard, I believe, but they do have crafting as one of their skills, which is very, very much in keeping with what they do. And that's sort of what they start out with their kit. As they advance to higher levels, they eventually wind up with a progression that's a little bit different than anybody else. They get weapon expertise faster than the spellcasters by a significant amount, but they don't go up to weapon mastery, because by the time that they would have been into weapon mastery, they have so many items that are just getting so diverse and so broad.
And that gets into one of the major things about Alchemist is that the Alchemist doesn't have like, oh, this is the spell list that I have that I cast spells from, and I have access to that specifically because of my class, and other folks wouldn't necessarily, because anybody can use alchemical items in general, but the Alchemist is just able to use them more effectively and able to use them in great numbers without paying large amounts. Thank you very much for the cheers, Reckless.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much. So Linda's right. The Alchemist design of sort of how it grows is really interesting and different from everything else. It's sort of it's one of the classes that has a design from Stephen Radney McFarlane, who is one of the 4 original designers of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And the way it works is, like with every other class that has a ton of daily resources, like a spellcaster, right? As you're leveling up, you get, you'll have like 3 9th level spells and 3 8th level spells and 3 7th level spells and 3 6th level spells and so on, down to lower level spells that are not really that valuable. You can find some that stay pretty fresh up at higher levels, but they're certainly not as good as what you have on afterwards. Plus, spells often have a shorter duration when you put them up. I mean, some of them don't. Mage armor, right? That's going to last the whole day.
Oh, thanks again, Numbat.
Thanks, Numbat. That
we
cleared
just hit 100%.
it. We hit 100%. Now anyone who joins in can get the super high-ranking emoji. We'll see if they're totally new ones now. So when we're talking about the Alchemist, however, the Alchemist not only gets more uses of their alchemy each day as they level up.
Oh man!
Oh wow, we got a hype
potion.
We got an alchemy potion. That's perfect. Yes, that's the best. Okay.
Thanks.
So they not only get more uses of their alchemy each day, but also every single one of those uses can be the most powerful alchemical item that they have. So obviously alchemical items are more understated than a 9th level spell, but you can have an alchemist at level 17 who has 40 at least probably more than 40 alchemical items, and the ability to spontaneously pull in anything in their entire book a certain number of times that they left reagents for. Because the way that it works is you have a certain number of reagents each day. You can pre-prepare them to get 2 of an item, or 3 if it's one of your specialty items. Or you can leave them unprepared and you get 1 item just as a single action, just anything that you happen to know how to make. Which means that as your book, alchemy book grows up, as the edition continues and more alchemical items are added, and you add them to your alchemy book, your character's options get extremely, they get broader and broader and broader, assuming you can afford to learn all of the formulas, because, well, once there's 1,000 alchemical formulas, if you can afford to learn them, then your GM and other players will glare at you as you're like, wait a minute, it's my turn, I have 1,000 alchemical formulas that I can
I think it is worth saying for GMs as well that it takes time to learn and money to learn.
It does. So, you're not probably going to have 1,000 right away. In fact, that's a lot of money to get all 1,000. But you will get a pretty good number that you can spontaneously go into. The weakness of the Alchemist if you don't, especially if you're a bombing build where you're throwing bombs every time you attack, is at very low levels, because the way it scales and the number of reagents you get means that you start off with a pretty small amount and you have to be pretty conservative. Granted, at that level, like at first level, nobody except the fighter has expert proficiency in things anyway, so you're not bad with like a ranged weapon or maybe a melee weapon if you're if you're a mutagenist. But you can't just with impunity throw bombs all the time at low levels. And a lot of people, especially with the Art of Fumbus, with Fumbus being a bomber, it can be your first instinct with Alchemist. But you have to find a way around that at first. At higher levels, first of all, you can get sort of some perpetual bombs that are pretty weak, but that you could throw as like a later attack at one of the penalties where it's like, I don't know, I want to throw my best bomb at this penalty. Another very important thing about alchemists that make them sort of a class that really matches in with Pathfinder's second edition's paradigm is that in second edition, a lot fewer monsters than in first edition have just a panoply of random resistances to things just because they exist. You don't really like, oh, it's an angel, so that means they're immune to petrification and electricity and acid and resist fire and cold and sonic and gelatin or whatever. But instead, they usually have thematic resistances and immunities and thematic weaknesses. So
your alchemist as a character who is very intelligent is likely to be good at some of those skills for identifying what those resistances and weaknesses are, which is useful once you start pulling into that toolkit. Because, sure, you can play an alchemist who only has fire bombs, but it's good to play with a variety of different attack options. So you can decide, am I going to try to chill this enemy? Am I going to hit this enemy with something that's going to do persistent damage? Am I going to try to hit this enemy with something that's going to apply a certain debuff? Which elements am I going to use? That sort of thing.
You can put flat-footed. You can put frightened. You can put other debuffs on the enemy, but you can also try to hit their weakness. If you do hit their weakness, you are going to do very well. Because the Alchemist has a unique... if we're talking about bombs, which are what you use to hit different weaknesses, fire bomb, ice bomb, lightning bomb, and from the Advanced Player's Guide, you can do like mental damage and poison damage, all sorts of possible types of damage. Alchemist's most understated benefits when making attacks with bombs is that their splash damage applies even on a miss. And it is added to the bomb's damage on your main target on a hit. What that means is, especially if you have, there's a feat in there and some bomber abilities that you can get a little bit more splash damage. That first of all, even if they're not weak against your bomb, your expected damage is higher than you might think because of the damage on a miss. And I remember one of the people who keeps one of the damage spreadsheets on like Paizo.com and the other forums did a calculation with Alchemists where counting the damage on a miss, they were like up there with archer fighters at certain levels, which is pretty intense. It's only at the levels that are like kind of good for the Alchemist side, because archer fighters are pretty strong ranged combatants and do not have a ton of alchemical items. But when you're fighting an enemy with weakness, the enemy with weakness is very sad because of the fact that you are going to hit their weakness with the splash damage on a miss. So if the enemy has weakness 20 to whatever you're doing, and you throw and you miss 3 times, you did 60 plus 3 times the splash damage, which is, for a turn when you miss 3 times, I mean, by the time it has weakness 20, it's probably pretty strong, and 60 is not like it's dead or anything like that. But it's still for a turn when you miss 3 times, 60 plus 3 times the splash damage is pretty high. And if you get throw in some hits, throw in some crits, throw in some debuffs if you get a hit, and your character has just done a bunch of stuff. That's just the bomber. If you're using mutagens, they have some significant drawbacks, but some very powerful benefits that tend to be one better than any item that the party could possibly have at that point in time. Meaning that if you assume a party that has bought like every skill item in the game and every possible fundamental item, that it gives an additional +1 that nobody else can give. And most parties don't have everything, from what I found, at least with our War for the Crown party. So something like the Genius Mutagen, which is not even that combat focused but can help you with skills, is something that you can use to help out with skills.
Yeah, so you can. So I mean, oftentimes with those, then the flexibility is you'll have certain things that you're going for because say you know that this particular party member is always going to want you to bolster one thing and not care so much about the thing that's getting getting penalized, and they're going to want that to be part of a standard kit. Hey, make me this mutagen. But you'll also have situations where it's like, okay, you know, for this particular mission, we're going to be doing an infiltration, or we need to be able to all move quickly. So you can augment the party individually, or you can look at helping everybody out for a particular case.
Right. And there's basically no one in your party who's going to be too upset about getting a... I mean, most people won't be too upset about a Juggernaut mutagen unless you're fighting something that goes up against the weaknesses of the Juggernaut mutagen, which is being kind of susceptible to mental things.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's more hit points that refresh, it makes you pretty tough. It's a good mutagen. And there's a lot of people who also might like the Drakeheart mutagen, which is essentially like breastplate in a bottle that's a little bit better too. So both defensive mutagens are ones that you can kind of rely on that somebody's going to want. The offensive ones, like Linda said, you can find other party members and you can give people what they want. There's even one that kind of makes your character into a sort of very uninformed public figure because you are super good at all the charisma-based skills, but all of your recall knowledge, if you fail, is a critical failure, and you know bad information. So your character, like, what they tell everyone they're gonna believe you, but it may not be correct. So there are definitely some pretty cool things you can do with that. Poisoners can just put so much poison onto your weapons, and anyone who has faced against a monster with poison in Pathfinder 2nd Edition knows that poison is no slouch in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It does go against Fortitude, which is one of the stronger defenses for monsters overall because the game has a lot of big, giant, tough monsters. But other than that, you could do a lot of damage with poison damage, and if you've pre-applied it onto certain weapons, it can be pretty nice. So yeah, there's a lot going on. Linda talked about the alchemical doctor healer. They eventually can get an ability that maximizes all of their healing elixirs, and the amount of healing they can put out is also pretty intense. So alchemists, based on how they specialize with themselves,
yeah,
can
and
do
healing
some
as
very
well.
interesting
Like it's
tricks.
not just hit point healing, right? Other healing elixirs like anti-plague and antitoxin and stuff like that are certainly very useful as well for preparing for a variety of foes.
Yep. And so...
Or antidote, rather.
Yep. Antidotes. So with antidotes, we get into another thing, which is we talked about, like, a lot of spells are going to be, like, a minute, maybe 10 minutes. But some of those higher level versions of alchemical elixirs are going to be an hour or more. So that's part of how I mentioned earlier in the episode that the Alchemist class advances at a power increase that's sort of like a higher polynomial than you expect. By which I mean, people always say exponential when they growth when they really mean that it's like quadratic or tertiary or you know some growth rate that is higher than linear, because exponential would actually mean like it doubles in power
every level
a certain
or
thing.
yeah.
Now math does make it so that there is some exponential growth overall in all PCs, but when people talk about like the exponential caster versus the linear martial or whatever in certain games, quadratic is sometimes comes up. The Alchemist is sort of more than quadratic if you think about it, because they linearly grow in the number of reagents they have each day, because that's based on their level. They linearly grow in the level and power rating of what the reagents create in terms of items. So that is a thing. Their numbers are going up just like everybody else's do, but also not just the power of their items. Like a high level Eagle Eye elixir is not just a better Eagle Eye elixir that lasts for the same amount of time,
but also duration.
Like a higher level heroism is a better heroism that lasts for the same amount of time. It is a better Eagle Eye Elixir that lasts for more time. So, or wait, no, Eagle Eye Elixir
A lot of them last for more
is
time.
not a good
That's
example
a
of that. I
specific one.
picked that one because of the fact that I thought that it went up in duration, but it actually is already an hour at first level. So it was just better than I thought. But there are some mutagens, though. Let's go to Juggernaut mutagen. So we were talking about that before. I didn't give the exact specifics. So the Juggernaut mutagen, it starts out, and, you know, for the next minute, you get a +1 on fort saves, 5 temporary hit points that can refresh after a full minute, which you can't have it on for because it only lasts for a minute, and -2 on will saves, perception checks, and initiative. Which, if your perception was already your initiative, is kind of will saves and perception checks. But then as you go up in level, by level 3, which is only a few levels later, now you've doubled the benefits to 2 on the saves, 10 hit points, and the duration is 10 minutes, so those can refresh several times, potentially, if you fight multiple times in 10 minutes. Then at level 11, it is an hour with +3 and 30 temporary hit points. And then at level 17, +4, 45 temporary hit points, still an hour. So that has not only grown in the benefits it gives you, but it has also grown in how long it lasts. So in 2 different ways, the item has gotten better, and that's sort of
how. There's 3 ways it actually there, because not only is it that the numbers are increasing for the duration, the numbers are increasing for the benefit, but they also can often gain some additional powers that they grant you on top of that.
They do sometimes,
like the Juggernaut here with its assistance on your fortitude saves.
Right. And so they grow usually in between, I guess, 1 and 3 ways. It's sort of a very sneaky way that the Alchemist is increasing, because it's totally not like in any of the pages of the Alchemist class that I have down here.
Yeah.
That's all in the items and what they're doing. So the Alchemist also gets some other features where they can they're based on their alchemical field, like I was mentioning before about maximizing the elixirs of life eventually. They can brew multiple alchemy at the same time, and I wasn't sure what I thought about the ability to do multiple brew of alchemy until in War for the Crown, our alchemist used it pretty regularly in order to sort of extend his turns when he had haste, without using quick bomber to draw and then throw. He could create a large batch of the crappier bombs that are the correct element against the monster that they're fighting right then, and then just start throwing them. And one of the strikes was from the extra strike from haste, and it was actually pretty convenient. Then the Alchemist has a pretty strong variety of weird feats. It does have some that are pretty good if you are the correct type of Alchemist, like ones that can enhance the type of mutagen you're using, a whole bunch that let you like sort of put additives in that like mess around with your alchemy and give you a little bit of an incentive not to always use the highest level items, although frankly there sometimes isn't an item at exactly the highest level that you wanted, so you can kind of get into alchemy at the additives like for free. You can put in debilitations with debilitating bombs so that you are throwing an additional debuff in addition to the debuff the bomb already does on its own. One that our alchemist did once to a creature with weakness was sticky bomb. Actually, he did it a lot of times, but one very memorable time when he soloed a monster with weakness that was like it was considered a low threat encounter for the party on its own, and it kind of came in the side while the party was fighting a severe encounter, and the alchemist just went off and killed it by himself.
Yeah.
And the sticky bomb was part of it because it causes persistent damage of the creature's weak damage type, which would happened to be cold, which normally you can't get persistent damage with very easily.
And you can.
So he kept throwing and hitting sometimes, missing other times, hitting the weakness, and then it was taking persistent with weakness.
And then there's also several abilities that let you, instead of using the sort of the DC that the item would normally have, say, no, I'm going to use my Alchemist class DC to make items. And
in the errata, that became a class feature, so now you don't have to take that feat.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I did not realize that.
It did. a lot of people pointed out that that's the kind of thing that we would usually make a class feature. So we made it a class feature. So if you're using the first printing of the core rulebook, the Alchemist class got a few important quality of life tweaks that were added onto it that they are maybe subtler than just being like some kind of like gigantic boost, but when you add them all together, I think they make a big difference.
Yeah,
for
like the Alchemist tools, so that the tools that an alchemist needs to carry around to sort of do what they need to do on a day-to-day basis are light.
Yeah, that one was in the like the first update to the Rotted 2, so people have heard about it for longer, but it's not in here.
Yeah,
so,
well, you started by saying things that if you had the first printing.
Yeah,
so
and
that's worth pointing
your
out.
first printing, that's true. That's actually something that it's another secret thing that's not in the Alchemist class that you'll find later in the items chapter. So when you're playing the Alchemist, the items chapter is very important to look at. But you can eventually get some pretty useful stuff, like being able to have your elixirs of life just counteract a whole bunch of debuffs if you're into elixirs of life. Another interesting thing about the Alchemist class that I was going to mention earlier but forgot, so I'll mention it now, is that most characters who have a bunch of buffs or healing or something that they apply to the party, poison type things, if you're a spellcaster, there is a sort of a clearinghouse for those. There is a funnel, and it's a limited reagent in the party, and that's your actions. Even if your wizard has 4 spells that are, like, if combined, like, are gonna win it, and it would be great if the fighter, the cleric, and the rogue, and you cast those 4 spells, you can't because you're the only one who can cast them. With the Alchemist, you can put things onto other people. So, Merciful Elixirs removes effects, but it's mostly the same that a champion could remove with Lay on Hands. But if the champion gets taken out of the fight with some kind of effect, they can't remove it from themselves with Lay on Hands. If the Alchemist does, then let me see about Merciful Elixir. They still can't because they would have had to create the item sooner with Merciful Elixir. But they can if they have an alchemical item specifically that removes that condition.
Yeah.
Or if somebody's removed far away from you and you want to lay on hands them, you can't. But if you've given them an elixir of life, then they can heal with the elixir of life. So there's a lot of interesting flexibility you can do if you pre-create an item and you hand it off to another party member. And don't underestimate the potential value of a little alchemical familiar friend. You can get it with a first level feat. And they can help you out, especially with some of the Alchemist-focused special familiar abilities in the core rulebook, and a few from the Advanced Player's Guide, like having the familiar kind of like scurry into your pouch and bring you out some stuff. Can be a very helpful little boost to your character in terms of getting the things that you need and playing around with your tools. Let me see. Another fun thing you can do is at higher levels is like make potions into elixirs and get things like maybe haste or fly from those kind of potions. Make eternal potions that just that's level 16 where it just lasts indefinitely, which could mean, I believe, that if you had that and improbable elixirs and you made a potion of haste or fly, I need to check. It says 9th level or lower, so I think you can.
Yeah.
And then you could use Eternal Elixir to just be hasted all the time.
Forever.
And be like, hey, fighter, I know you got that as your level 20 feet, but my level 16 and 18 feet combined have a flexible set of things, one of which can do that. Or I could do something else. Or you can use Exploitive Bomb to screw around with your enemy's resistances. Persistent Mutagen to just have a mutagen that's always up. There's a lot of interesting things that come up at the higher levels. Mind Blank Mutagen is also a really good mental protection, which is very specific. But if you specifically want to have that effect, it is a very powerful effect. Miracle Worker, resurrect your allies once every 10 minutes. So they eventually get some pretty big stuff that you're going on. Mega Bomb, AoE bombs, which That could be fun. Just throw a bomb and there it's a
Mega Ball.
30-foot radius burst that does, I think, all of its full damage to everything. And it's still one action. Wait, no. It is one action, and... Yeah, it looks like you add an additive and use the interact action to throw it rather than a strike, and you don't make an attack roll.
Yep.
So, it could be fun, or a perfect mutagen where you don't get the drawback. That's also handy. So, basically the Alchemist progresses in some different, interesting, and weird ways. One of the things about it is that it may not get stronger at the same levels that you expect from everybody else.
Yeah.
So that's why the person who was doing the damage spreadsheet, I think, found that there were some levels where it was doing more than the fighter, because its increases sometimes are not even on the Alchemist advancement chart. They're on the here's when items come chart. Oh, it got a better item right here. But one of the things that it sacrifices for that is that it is probably might become legendary in crafting, and certainly in several skills as any character can. But it doesn't actually go up to legendary in any of the sort of like class featurey things that can go up to legendary. It's gonna stay at master for armor.
Yeah.
And
but I mean that makes sense, because the Alchemist is really focused on those items. The items are what the Alchemist is living and breathing through their crafting. So that is the way that their power is reflected more strongly than the specific abilities of their body.
Plus, they stick to expert for accuracy. Even though they get it faster. We mentioned this earlier. They get it faster than a spellcaster does, but they don't go past it. And it is something that certainly if they did go past it, they would be pretty intense at higher levels with tons and tons and tons of items.
Well, because you've got
the martial level accuracy that matches everybody except the fighter.
Especially because of the idea of having splash and things like that. So there's this built-in thing where it's like, okay, even if you miss, you're still going to have an ability to affect.
That's absolutely true. But by virtue of being a little bit behind like that, every +1 is pretty valuable. Now, they could be using a mutagen that gives, while giving some drawbacks. Even for the bomber, there's a Quicksilver one where your movement speed is ridiculous, and you're better at accuracy with dexterity-based throwing things, but you lose a lot of hit points. And it's not negligible how many hit points you lose from the Quicksilver mutagen. But you can get back one of the accuracy for yourself that stacks with literally everything in the game, because nothing is going to give you a higher item bonus than the maximum item bonus of any item of that level based on the Game Mastery Guide guidelines, at least right now, at the time of this video. You can give that to your other party members too, but you're probably not going to catch up to that last 1 point. And since your key ability score is intelligence, there will be some levels where a person who started with 18 in like dexterity or strength, or their accuracy stat, also has like an even ability score, and you have an odd ability score that's one lower, and they have a little more accuracy from that too. But with an Alchemist, you could play a character who thinks things through, brings the items that are just giving the party an hour long of benefits. And like the Eagle Eye Elixir I talked about before, I didn't remember that the low level ones lasted super long too. But the high level one, that was one of the ones that made the wizard being like, you can give this to the whole party for how long? And that was because it gave a huge amount of perception to everyone in the group. And it also gave the ability to automatically search for secret doors and traps when they pass within 10 feet, at which point, like, I think they never missed a secret door or trap again, because the entire party was automatically getting a secret check. And they didn't have to use the search tactic, and they didn't have to go to the slower speed that you need to do the search tactic and check everything. It was pretty good. There's also even some low-level alchemical items that at higher levels can be pretty handy if you have the actions to drink them. Like the Mist Form Elixir that gives the enemies basically a flat check, or they're going to miss you with all their stuff against you. So it's not a high flat check, it's just basically like concealed. But that adds up, especially if it winds up being a really big spell, a really big miss. Uh, Plus, just little things like cat's eye elixirs. I think our alchemist was handing out. Don't those
Which ones were those? Those were the ones.
I think those are the ones that make it so that you ignore concealment against things. So let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, and even if they're invisible, the flat check is actually not too bad. As long as they're within 30 feet. So yeah, the alchemist was handing out some of those in case things were concealed or invisible. It's also handy if you were using a misform, if your party's like healers and buffers don't have the mischance
yes.
against you.
Yes, for sure.
And just little other benefits, being able to sort of always have just the right thing for the situation, just the right kind of damage type to hit the weakness of the monster that's in there, being smart enough to figure out what those weaknesses are. That's sort of what the alchemist deal is. You're never going to like fire a meteor swarm that like uses up like a really super high level spell slot. You can only do that a few times. Anything you get, you're gonna be able to do
a
lot, except at very low levels where you need to think about like sort of backups and what you're gonna do as a mixture. But at higher levels, it's just sort of like free for all. Do it a ton of times. Whatever you find you can do, you can spam. And that's sort of the mechanical. That's sort of the mechanics of the Alchemist as we saw it in our War for the Crown game, which went from Book 1 to Book 6, converted into Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Went through a lot of the feats. There are definitely some cool ones in the Advanced Player's Guide that you should check out too, including one that lets you get more different kinds of perpetual items. Those are the ones that you can just make an infinite number of times that are kind of weaker. So you can get them one from another field or two from your own field. So for instance, if you're a bomber and you want to be able to hit lots of different kinds of weaknesses, you can pick up two more, because you can't literally have all of the types of bombs in the game infinitely as the bomber, but you can pick up quite a few different ones that you have infinitely, make a few of the other kinds just in case. And even if you find like that one of those like one or two monsters in any of the bestiaries that have a weakness to mental effects, then you're like, oh well, too bad, because I brought mental damage.
Yeah.
I bet nobody else was specifically intending to deal mental damage to something with a weakness to mental effects. Kitsune Warlock says, is that a challenge? Is it a challenge to try to have an alchemist that perpetually has all of the bombs? I think that you cannot like defeat that challenge, at least at the time of this video. There's not a way to create a character that has a perpetual access to every bomb that exists in the game, but it is certainly possible to have an alchemist who learns how to make all of the bombs and has a few of every bomb that they have made for that day. So and Joe in the chat says, versatility, thy name is Alchemist. That's definitely true. It's good to be versatile, but it's also good to have a few mainstays. Often they're those long-lasting ones, and some of them
and the ones that you prepare in advance to make sure that you've got them in large numbers for the battle.
Absolutely. And there's some that like are easy to miss, but very, very helpful at lower levels. So I recommend looking through the list. You might find something that is a lot cooler than you initially thought it was when you didn't read the specifics of the level. For instance, the Bravo's Brew is a 2nd level item. For an hour, it gives you +1 on will saves, +2 against fear. The first time you will get that much of a bonus from a permanent item is at 8th level. We'll give you +1, but not +2 against fear on all of your saves with a resilient rune on your armor. So here we are, 6 levels earlier. An hour is a pretty long period of time. And it's also only 7 GP. So your alchemist could brew some extra ones, and it's not really a big cost, especially like level 5, level 6, level 7, you still might not have a resilient rune, and that amount of money is kind of cheap. It goes up at level 10 to be even better, but the level 2 version is one that really stands out for a bunch of levels, and that's just B. That's letter B. I'm just going through, and you can go through too and find your new favorite alchemical item. That's sort of part of the fun of being an alchemist is just kind of going through all the different items and finding the ones that work for you, your group, and your group's playstyle. Because it might not be the ones that, like, I said are good, or the ones that you go online and read a guide. Guides are usually pretty savvy, but they might not realize that one of the items in there is really good for your group's particular dynamic.
And one of the great things about the Alchemist flexibility is that it's relatively easy to learn new formulas, to try new strategies, and see what you have the most fun with, because ultimately that's the point of the game.
Yes. So one last thing, because there's one last thing about Alchemist. You may not be a single class Alchemist. In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there are archetypes that allow you to multi-class into other classes and pick up a bunch of stuff from those other classes. The Alchemist multi-class is perhaps the most underrated multi-class for how powerful it is, I think. Not even because it's like that much people saying, oh, don't take the Alchemist multi-class, but because it's very good and it's often underlooked. Mm-hmm. So we've got the Alchemist multi-class archetype, which is here. I'm assuming that people can see this because I'm not actually looking at myself right now.
It's good.
Yes, there you go. It's a picture that's based on Linda's character from Curse of the Crimson Throne, who is a barbarian rogue that my full-class alchemist convinced to take one level in Alchemist so that I could give her my mutagen in Pathfinder 1st Edition.
She had 10 int. Eventually she got a headband to get that up to 12. But she was still an alchemist. She had her own first level shields, and she drank the mutagens that your character well prepared, and they were very, very helpful.
That's right, because in 1st Edition, only an alchemist could drink a mutagen or they would get very sick. But it didn't have to be the same alchemist who made it. Mm-hmm. And mine were very, very good mutagens that were better. And she gave me her really bad mutagens. You eventually took a few more levels, I think.
I think I got up to 4th level eventually.
But then you would have lost another base attack bonus, so you stopped.
Yeah.
In Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you don't have to worry about... if you're Illyria, you can be Linda's character. You can just be really strong, like in that picture, and not lose any base attack bonus with your Barbarian. But you do need 14 intelligence, so that would have been a problem for Illyria. Although with the ability score increases as they are,
Illyria, we also did roll stats, and I did not roll well for Illyria.
You got more close to a 15.5, which is below average.
Yeah.
If we built them out, you might have been able to afford it. The main thing that you get from Alchemist multi-class is that you actually get a pretty good number of reagents each day. It's almost as much as an alchemist, but you can't pre-prepare and get double out of it. Basically, it is equal to your level instead of your level plus your intelligence modifier, which is the lion's share. Mm-hmm. But based on the way the feats work, you're never going to make an alchemical item that's more than basically half your level. And in order to keep it to be more like half your level, you are going to have to... Let me see about this. Is that exactly what... No, it's a little better than that. It's only half your level for a while, but at level 12, if you take all of the feats, it actually is going to wind up being more like your level minus 5. Which, honestly, level 15 alchemical stuff is pretty good at levels 20, so don't sleep on the alchemist dedication.
So, Kitsune Warlock has a question. Is there a way to melee alchemical weapons in 2nd edition?
Interesting. I don't think that you can melee any bombs, but it certainly is not outside of the mandate of the class to have, like, some kind of weird alchemical, like, stick that you snap and it starts lighting on fire and is like a one-shot like melee weapon. They just don't have any right now. Yeah, Weezicus has a boomstick. You could.
Yeah, totally.
You could potentially do that. That's something you could homebrew in your own games as well.
Yeah, like something that it's like a match thing that you like strike against.
Kitsune Warlock has a syringe spear, so you definitely can. I think they were in 1st edition for Darrow. They may already be. I can't remember, but having a weapon that like could inject things, that's for sure. But there aren't right now any like alchemical items that the alchemical item itself is a one-use melee weapon.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist at the time of this video.
Mm-hmm.
So the let's see. Rex Liquid says a chemical ice dagger. It could be a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that covers the multi-class alchemist and the single-class alchemist.
Yeah.
And there's always more things coming out for the alchemist. By the time you see this on YouTube, who knows how many alchemical items there will be. So there's probably some really big one that we that you think that we missed that may or may not have been out when we made the video. And there probably are some big ones that we didn't talk about literally at the time that we made the video. Does anyone else in the chat have any questions about sort of like how the Alchemist's features work, what the Alchemist things do, and they're saying next item workshop that we should need to make like an alchemical.
Well, propose it next time around. We'll put it on the chart, and if that's what folks vote for, that's what we'll build.
It could be. All right. So
let's say goodbye to YouTube.
I'm not seeing any additional questions yet. So I agree. Bye, YouTube. See you next time.